Beverly picked the worst possible day to mess with me. She had no idea that storming through my cabin door would change both our lives forever. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a simple HOA dispute turned into something that would shake our entire community to its core. 6 seconds. That's how long Beverly Whitmore stood frozen in my doorway, mouth agape, clipboard trembling in her hand. 6 seconds of absolute silence that felt like eternity. Because what she expected to find, some loser working from home dodging HOA fees, wasn't what greeted her at all. Instead, she found me hunched over classified documents with a 4-star general in full military dress, planning operations that could affect national security. But to understand why that moment shattered Beverly's world, you need to know how we got there. My name is Jason Brooks, former Army intelligence. 6 years of service until an IED in Afghanistan left me with a permanent limp and a Purple Heart I never talk about. These days, I run a cybersecurity consulting business from my converted lake cabin office at Pine Ridge Lake Community. It was supposed to be my sanctuary. Crystal clear water stretching beyond my windows, military-grade internet humming quietly in the corner, and the kind of peace you can only find when you're miles away from the chaos of the world. 8 months ago, I thought I'd found paradise. The cabin sat perfectly isolated, surrounded by towering pines and the gentle lapping of water against my dock. My morning started with coffee and the sunrise painting the lake golden. Afternoons were spent protecting America's digital infrastructure from threats most people never even know exist. Evenings belonged to silence, fishing, and the kind of solitude that heals old wounds. I should have known it was too good to last. The trouble started with a knock on my door and a woman holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. Beverly Whitmore introduced herself as the HOA president with the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. She was smaller than I expected for someone who'd eventually terrorize an entire community, but there was something sharp about her, like a blade wrapped in silk. "Mr. Brooks," she said, that fake warmth dripping from every word, "I need you to sign up for our mandatory premium maintenance package. $500 a month. Every resident is required to participate. $500 for lawn service." My military training had taught me to spot scams from a mile away, and every alarm bell in my head was screaming. But Beverly wasn't asking. She was telling. And the way her eyes swept over my property, cataloging everything from my satellite dish to the government vehicles that occasionally visited, told me this woman had already decided I was a problem she needed to solve. I asked for a breakdown, market comparisons, basic due diligence that any reasonable person would expect. That's when Beverly's mask slipped just enough for me to see what was underneath. The smile got tighter. The voice got harder. And suddenly we weren't talking about lawn care anymore. We were talking about power. "Community standards are non-negotiable, Mr. Brooks," she said, and something in her tone made my skin crawl. "I'm sure you understand the importance of compliance." But I didn't understand. Not yet. I had no idea that Beverly Whitmore had turned our peaceful community into her personal kingdom, where she ruled through fear and lined her pockets with stolen money. I didn't know that questioning her authority would mark me as an enemy in her eyes, or that she'd spend the next several months trying to destroy my life piece by piece. All I knew was that something felt wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. And, in my experience, when something feels wrong, it usually is. The math was simple, but the implications were staggering. Normal lawn service in our area cost about $150 a month. Beverly was charging more than 3 times that amount, pocketing the difference while providing substandard work through the cheapest contractors she could find. With 30 houses in our community, she was stealing over $100,000 every single year. But Beverly wasn't just running a financial scam, she was running a psychological warfare campaign. The moment I started asking questions, she threatened me with a $5,000 emergency violation fine for non-compliance with community standards. $5,000 for not signing up for overpriced lawn service. The audacity was breathtaking. I called my college friend Samantha Davis, a civil rights lawyer who'd helped me navigate the bureaucracy when I first started my consulting business. Her assessment was brutally honest. Jason, it's definitely extortion, but proving it in court could cost you $20,000 or more, and there's no guarantee you'd win. So there I was, stuck between paying Beverly's protection money or risking financial ruin in a legal battle I might not even win. Every fiber of my being rebelled against giving this woman a single penny, but sometimes tactical retreat is the smartest move until you can gather intelligence and plan a proper counterattack. Against every instinct I had, I wrote Beverly a check for $500 and watched her smug little smile as she tucked it into her purse. "Smart choice, Jason," she said, and the way she used my first name felt like a violation. "I've handled bigger problems than you before." That comment told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't Beverly's first rodeo. She'd been perfecting this system for years, terrorizing residents with fake authority and manufactured violations until they had no choice but to comply. But what she didn't realize was that she'd just picked a fight with someone who'd been trained to handle much worse than petty suburban tyrants. People like Beverly always make the same mistake. They think intimidation is a one-way street. They dish it out but can't take it when it comes back at them. And they never know when to quit while they're ahead. When I delayed the second month's payment to do more research, Beverly escalated immediately. Within 24 hours, I had an emergency property violation notice taped to my door. According to Beverly, my excessive electronic equipment was violating residential zoning requirements. I had 14 days to cease all unauthorized commercial activities or face a $10,000 fine. $10,000. And that wasn't even the worst part. She was threatening to force me to shut down my cabin office entirely, which would have destroyed my livelihood. My government contracts required a secure, isolated workspace, and this cabin was perfect for that. Beverly was essentially trying to put me out of business because I had the audacity to question her illegal fee structure. That's when I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about power and control. Beverly had created her little kingdom where she could terrorize residents with impunity, and anyone who dared resist got crushed. But what she didn't know was that sometimes, when you pick on the wrong person, the universe has a way of delivering exactly the kind of justice you never saw coming. The call came at 7:30 in the morning, 3 days before Beverly would make the biggest mistake of her life. The voice on the other end was one I'd recognize anywhere. General Frank Armstrong, my former commanding officer from Afghanistan, the man who'd literally saved my life when that IED went off. "Jason," he said in that commanding voice that could make a room full of soldiers snap to attention, "I need a secure location for some classified project planning. Think your cabin office could handle a top-secret briefing?" My heart rate spiked. General Armstrong didn't make casual phone calls, and he definitely didn't schedule meetings for anything less than critical national security matters. "Absolutely, sir. What are we talking about?" "Operation Mountain Shield," he said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. $50 million cybersecurity upgrade for 5 military installations throughout Colorado. Foreign adversaries are actively targeting our communications infrastructure, and we need your expertise to coordinate defensive protocols between multiple agencies. I felt that familiar rush of purpose that came with important missions. This was what I'd trained for, what I'd built my entire business around. Protecting American military personnel from threats they'd never even know existed. "When do you need me, sir?" "Tomorrow morning. 800 hours. And Jason, his voice dropped to that serious tone I remembered from our deployment briefings. "This is classified at the highest levels. We'll be discussing coordinated cyber, warfare threats, military network vulnerabilities, and response protocols that could literally save American lives. The classification level is so high that even discussing it in the wrong location could compromise ongoing operations." As I hung up the phone, I mentioned Beverly's harassment campaign briefly, just that some local bureaucrat thought I was violating zoning laws with my consulting work. The general chuckled, but there was something steel-hard underneath it. "Son, what we're planning tomorrow is bigger than she can possibly imagine." But Beverly didn't know what was coming. She had no idea that her petty little war against Jason Brooks was about to collide with something so far beyond her understanding that it would shatter her entire worldview in less than 7 seconds. That night, she was probably planning her next harassment campaign, maybe preparing more fake violation notices or coordinating with her unemployed friends who helped her impersonate county officials. Beverly was convinced she was winning this war of attrition, slowly grinding me down until I either paid up or moved away in defeat. What she didn't realize was that tomorrow morning would bring a reckoning she never saw coming. Because sometimes, when you spend your time terrorizing innocent people, you accidentally pick a fight with someone who's connected to forces you can't even comprehend. The irony was beautiful, really. Beverly thought she was about to catch me red-handed with some local business clients, maybe small-time IT managers or suburban entrepreneurs she could intimidate into supporting her case against me. Instead, she was about to discover that the loser she'd been harassing for months was actually planning classified military operations that could affect national security. But until that moment arrived, Beverly slept soundly in her bed, completely unaware that her reign of terror was about to end in the most spectacular way possible. Morning came with the sound of military vehicles crunching over gravel. General Armstrong arrived at 7:30, 30 minutes early as always, carrying classified materials in a locked briefcase and wearing his full-dress uniform. 4 stars gleaming on his shoulders like badges of authority that Beverly couldn't even begin to comprehend. He set up our makeshift command center with military precision. Topographical maps spread across my dining table. Pentagon-issued laptop humming with encrypted communications, monitoring equipment that looked like something out of a spy thriller. The classification level was so high that we had to establish secure communications protocols before we could even begin discussing the threats we were facing. "Jason," the general said, his voice carrying that weight of responsibility that comes with protecting American lives, "foreign adversaries are coordinating sophisticated attacks against our military communication networks. What we're designing today isn't just about protecting infrastructure. It's about preventing attacks that could compromise ongoing operations and put military personnel at risk in combat zones." The scope was staggering. We were talking about cyber warfare threats that most civilians couldn't even imagine, coordinated attacks from foreign intelligence agencies, and the kind of national security implications that keep Pentagon officials awake at night. My role in Operation Mountain Shield was to design comprehensive security protocols that would coordinate between the FBI, NSA, CIA, and Department of Defense. As we worked through the technical details, spreading more classified documents across my table and setting up additional monitoring equipment, I completely forgot about Beverly and her petty little HOA drama. How could lawn service disputes possibly matter when you're working to protect American military installations from foreign cyber attacks? Big mistake on my part. At exactly 8 o'clock, Beverly Whitmore burst through my cabin door like she was conducting a federal raid. She didn't knock, didn't announce herself. Just stormed in with her cameras rolling, clipboard raised like a weapon, mouth already open to deliver what I'm sure was going to be an epic tirade about illegal business operations and zoning violations. She expected to find me with regular consulting clients, maybe some local business owners or IT managers she could embarrass and intimidate into supporting her case against me. Instead, she found a 4-star general in full military dress uniform, surrounded by classified documents marked top secret, Pentagon equipment, and enough military hardware to coordinate a small war. For exactly 6.8 seconds, my cabin office experienced the most complete silence I have ever heard in my life. Beverly's brain simply could not process what she was seeing. This was supposed to be Jason Brooks, The troublemaker who wouldn't pay his HOA fees, the loser who worked from home because he couldn't get a real job. Instead, she'd walked into what looked like a Pentagon briefing room, complete with a 4-star general who was now turning around to assess this unexpected civilian interruption with the kind of professional calm that comes from 3 decades of military service. The woman who'd been terrorizing our community for years with fake authority had just come face to face with someone who possessed real authority, the kind that comes with 4 stars and the power to protect America's military infrastructure from foreign threats. Beverly froze solid, mouth open, finger pointing at nothing, camera hanging loose in her hand, brain completely blue-screening as it tried to reconcile her expectations with reality. The general's reaction was absolutely perfect. He didn't jump up, didn't shout, didn't even seem particularly surprised. He just slowly turned around with that military bearing that commands instant respect and assessed the situation with the kind of professional calm you only develop after years of dealing with unexpected threats in combat zones. "Ma'am," he said in a voice that was polite but carried the unmistakable authority of someone who'd briefed presidents and coordinated military operations across multiple continents. "You're interrupting classified national security planning. I'm going to need to see some identification and understand your authority to enter this residence." Beverly's attempted reboot was painful to watch. She started stammering something about routine community compliance inspections and didn't realize there was military involvement. But her voice was shaking and she kept glancing around at all the classified materials like she'd accidentally wandered into Area 51. The general maintained his professional demeanor, but I could see him cataloging every detail of this interaction, probably wondering what kind of harassment campaign I'd been dealing with from this obviously unstable individual. In his world, people like Beverly were a security risk. Loose cannons who created unnecessary complications for important operations. "Ma'am," he said with that polite authority that somehow made it sound like both a question and a command, "perhaps you could explain the nature of this inspection and your legal authority to enter private property without permission or advance notice." That's when Beverly realized she was way over her head. She started backing toward the door, mumbling something about rescheduling and proper procedures. But you could see the wheels turning in her head, that desperate attempt to make sense of something that completely destroyed her entire narrative about Jason Brooks, the small-time rule breaker. As she retreated, still clutching her clipboard and camera like security blankets, she managed to whisper, "This investigation isn't finished, Brooks. This isn't over." But both the general and I could see that something fundamental had shifted in the dynamic. Beverly's fake authority had just collided with real authority, and she was clearly shaken by the encounter. The woman who'd spent months convinced she could intimidate anyone with a clipboard and manufactured violations had just discovered what actual power looked like when it decided to pay attention to her activities. After Beverly left, the general turned to me with that slight smile officers get when they're dealing with something that's both amusing and annoying. "Son, what exactly has this woman been doing to you?" I gave him a brief rundown of Beverly's harassment campaign, the fake violations, the extortion scheme, the manufactured fees that were bleeding our community dry. The general listened with the kind of focused attention he'd once given to intelligence briefings about enemy threats. "Jason," he said when I finished, "I've seen this exact pattern from corrupt officials in Afghanistan. People who use their tiny bit of authority to terrorize civilians for personal gain. It never ends well for them once their activities come to light." But Beverly wasn't done. Not by a long shot, because people like her can never leave well enough alone, even when they've just been shown how completely outmatched they really are. What Beverly did next defied all logic and common sense. Instead of backing down like any reasonable person would after accidentally interrupting a classified military briefing, she went completely off the deep end. Full paranoid conspiracy mode that would have been hilarious if it wasn't so dangerous. She spent the next 3 days researching everything she could find about me online, my military background, combat decorations, intelligence training, and when none of it fit her narrative about Jason Brooks, the small-time rule breaker, Beverly's twisted mind came up with the only explanation that made sense to her warped worldview. I wasn't just some consultant working from home. I was a government surveillance operative planted in the community to spy on innocent residents. I'm not kidding. This woman convinced herself that I was some kind of deep-cover intelligence agent conducting unauthorized civilian monitoring operations. In Beverly's paranoid fantasy, my expensive computer equipment wasn't for legitimate consulting work, it was surveillance gear. My professional visitors weren't clients. They were government handlers. And that 4-star general was obviously part of some elaborate federal conspiracy to monitor the peaceful residents of Pine Ridge Lake community. The woman had completely lost touch with reality. But here's the scary part. She was absolutely convinced she was right. Beverly started telling anyone who would listen that our community was under government surveillance and that Jason Brooks was the enemy agent responsible for violating everyone's privacy and constitutional rights. She wasn't just spreading rumors. She was building a case for what she saw as patriotic resistance against federal tyranny, but Beverly didn't stop at whispered conspiracy theories. She went full nuclear with an emergency community meeting, complete with PowerPoint presentation, and dramatic notices about threats to community security and protecting our constitutional rights from government overreach. 28 residents showed up that evening, and the atmosphere was genuinely tense. Beverly had been building anticipation for days, and people were genuinely worried about what she might have discovered about their quiet neighbor who worked from his cabin office. The presentation itself was a masterpiece of paranoid delusion. Beverly had compiled photographs of General Armstrong's military vehicle with the license plate circled in red marker like she was identifying a terrorist threat. She documented my excessive surveillance equipment, which was just my normal work computers and satellite internet setup. She'd created a timeline of my suspicious visitor patterns, showing when various government officials had come to my office for legitimate business meetings. Her grand conclusion? Jason Brooks was obviously a planted intelligence operative sent by unnamed federal agencies to monitor our community for unknown but definitely sinister purposes. Ladies and gentlemen, Beverly announced with the kind of dramatic flair usually reserved for courtroom dramas, we cannot allow government spies to operate in our peaceful residential community under the guise of normal business activities. But what Beverly didn't realize was that General Armstrong had heard about this community gathering and decided to attend. He was sitting quietly in the back row, wearing civilian clothes, taking notes with that military precision I remembered from Afghanistan, listening to Beverly's increasingly unhinged theories about federal conspiracies and surveillance operations. The best part? Beverly didn't recognize him without his uniform. The paranoia reached its absolute peak when Beverly put General Armstrong's photograph up on the big screen and announced to the entire room that this so-called general was obviously a hired actor I'd brought in to intimidate honest community members. Real military personnel, she declared with absolute conviction, wouldn't waste their time getting involved in suburban community disputes. This is clearly an elaborate deception designed to make you think Jason Brooks has legitimate government connections when he's actually conducting unauthorized surveillance operations. I swear, watching this unfold was like seeing a train wreck in slow motion. Beverly was standing there pointing at a photograph of an actual 4-star general, explaining to a room full of people why he couldn't possibly be real, while the man himself sat 20 feet away, taking notes like he was planning a military operation. The murmur in the room grew louder as people began recognizing the man in the back row. Isn't that the guy from Jason's place? He looks awfully official for a hired actor. Beverly's confident presentation started to falter as she noticed heads turning toward this tall, imposing figure who was now standing up slowly. When a man with 34 years of military service stands up in a room, people notice. You could feel the shift in atmosphere as General Armstrong walked toward the front with that commanding presence that fills a space even when he's wearing civilian clothes. Beverly's smile started to waver as the general approached and politely asked if he could address her concerns about his authenticity. The expression on her face when she realized who was standing in front of her was absolutely priceless. You could literally see the moment when her brain connected the dots between the photo on her screen and the man requesting permission to speak. "Ma'am," General Armstrong said with that polite authority that could command armies, "I believe there's been some confusion about my credentials that I'd like to clear up for everyone." What followed was the most professional character assassination I've ever witnessed. The general introduced himself with his full title and service record, confirmed his role in current national security operations, and explained that questioning his authenticity was profoundly unfortunate and suggested a fundamental misunderstanding of how military operations actually work. He wasn't angry, he was disappointed. And somehow, that was so much worse than anger could have been. The room went dead silent as 28 residents processed the fact that Beverly had just spent 20 minutes explaining why this man couldn't possibly be real while he sat in the back row documenting every word of her presentation. But the general wasn't finished, because while Beverly had been chasing conspiracy theories about federal surveillance, she'd been running a very real scam that had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from our community. And it was time for everyone to learn the truth about Beverly Whitmore's little operation. The mathematics of Beverly's theft were simple enough that everyone could follow along. She'd been charging $500 a month for maintenance services that actually cost $150 on the open market. That $350 difference, multiplied by 30 households, equaled over $100,000 in pure profit every single year. But that wasn't even the worst part. Beverly's maintenance company was registered to a vacant lot, meaning the business didn't actually exist. She'd been pocketing residents' money while hiring the cheapest contractors she could find to do substandard work, all while threatening anyone who dared question her system with massive fines and manufactured violations. The room erupted as residents started connecting the dots about their own experiences with Beverly's harassment campaign. Chris Henderson stood up first. "She fined me $500 for putting up a bird feeder because she called it an unauthorized wildlife attraction. I paid it because I was scared of what else she might do." Maria Santos added her story. $300 penalty because my Christmas wreath was supposedly a fire safety violation. 3 strings of lights on my house cost me $600 in fines. One by one, my neighbors revealed the extent of Beverly's reign of terror, and the pattern became crystal clear. This woman had been systematically terrorizing anyone who questioned her authority while stealing thousands of dollars from every household in the community. Beverly tried desperately to salvage the situation with increasingly deranged explanations. "These are coordinated attacks by government operatives trying to destroy me because I exposed their surveillance operation," she announced to a room that was no longer buying her conspiracy theories. Each statement made her sound more unhinged, and you could see residents looking at each other with that expression people get when they realize they've been dealing with someone who's completely lost touch with reality. General Armstrong delivered the final blow with his character testimony. "About my background and credentials. Mr. Brooks holds security clearances that require vetting by the FBI, CIA, NSA, and Department of Defense," he explained to the room. "The suggestion that he poses any kind of security threat to this community is not just wrong, it's insulting to the intelligence professionals who've spent years verifying his integrity." Then he turned that steel gaze directly on Beverly and added, "However, Ms. Whitmore appears to have some serious credibility issues that this community should address immediately. The HOA board, who'd been enablers of Beverly's operation for years, suddenly found their spines. They voted unanimously to remove her as president effective immediately, authorized a criminal referral for embezzlement and fraud, and retroactively dismissed every violation Beverly had issued against me. Beverly's empire of petty tyranny was crumbling in real time, and there wasn't a damn thing she could do to stop it. As the meeting broke up and residents started talking about recovery and restitution, Beverly made one last desperate attempt to maintain control. She stood up and screamed about witch hunts and government conspiracies, but nobody was listening anymore. Her threats of legal warfare rang hollow because everyone now understood that Beverly was facing potential federal prison time for her crimes. The woman who'd thought she could terrorize anyone with fake authority had just been destroyed by someone with real authority, real credentials, and real power to make things happen. Justice, when it finally comes, doesn't knock politely. Sometimes it kicks down the door wearing 4 stars and carrying classified documents. Within 48 hours of that community meeting, Beverly's entire world collapsed in ways she never could have imagined. She hired a lawyer with what remained of her personal savings and started threatening defamation lawsuits against anyone who'd spoken up about her operation. But truth doesn't care about legal threats from desperate people. Beverly's attorney took one look at the evidence Samantha Davis had compiled and walked away faster than you could say malpractice insurance. The criminal investigation expanded beyond Beverly's wildest nightmares. The county prosecutor assigned a forensic accountant to trace 3 years of systematic theft, and what they found was even worse than we'd initially thought. Beverly hadn't just been skimming money from maintenance contracts, she'd been running a sophisticated embezzlement operation with fake invoices, phantom employees, and shell companies designed to launder stolen HOA funds through multiple bank accounts. The IRS got interested when they realized Beverly had never reported that $126,000 in annual illegal income on her tax returns. Federal tax evasion charges. The postal inspectors joined the party because Beverly had been using the mail system to send fraudulent violation notices, which opened up mail fraud charges that could land her in federal prison. Beverly tried to flee before criminal charges could be filed, but her bank accounts were frozen, her property had multiple liens against it, and her insurance company had canceled her policies due to the criminal charges. The woman who'd spent years terrorizing our community with fake authority was learning what real authority looked like when it decided to focus on her activities. Meanwhile, Operation Mountain Shield moved forward exactly as planned. General Armstrong made sure I received full credit for my role in protecting America's military infrastructure, and the $50 million contract led to permanent Pentagon consulting opportunities and government referrals that would keep my expanding cybersecurity firm busy for years. The irony wasn't lost on me. Beverly's attempts to destroy my business had actually led to the biggest expansion in my company's history. Our community transformed, too. The new HOA president focused on actually helping residents instead of terrorizing them. Property values increased as word spread about our improved management. We started attracting quality residents who wanted to live in a neighborhood run by reasonable people instead of petty tyrants. Beverly's personal consequences cascaded like dominoes. Local news picked up the story about the HOA fraud scheme being exposed by a military hero. Her former friends avoided any association with the scandal. Her employment prospects evaporated as background checks revealed her criminal charges. The woman who'd built her identity around controlling other people's lives discovered what it felt like to have no control over her own fate. But perhaps the most beautiful justice came during Beverly's final days in Pine Ridge. Our new HOA president decided that Beverly would be subject to the exact same rules she'd imposed on everyone else. Every petty regulation, every arbitrary enforcement action, every manufactured violation that she'd used to terrorize residents was now applied to Beverly herself with the same strictness she'd shown her victims. Grass 1/4 inch too long? $75 fine. Wrong shade of decorations? $150 penalty. The woman who'd measured other people's grass with a ruler was now frantically mowing her lawn multiple times per week to avoid her own arbitrary standards. watching. Beverly comply with her own ridiculous rules was like seeing karma work with surgical precision. The day Beverly's moving truck pulled away from Pine Ridge Lake Community, I was sitting on my dock with General Armstrong, working through technical details of our next classified project. A young military family was already moving into Beverly's old house, their children laughing and playing in a yard that had once been regulated into silent submission. "Think she learned anything from this experience?" the general asked as we watched the moving truck disappear. I considered that question, watching those kids play freely in a space that had been a source of stress and anxiety for so long. "Maybe," I replied. "But that's her choice to make now." The general smiled and cast his line into the lake. "Mission accomplished, son. Sometimes the best defense is just living your life with integrity and letting karma handle the rest." And that's how Beverly Whitmore learned that karma doesn't just knock. Sometimes it kicks down the door wearing 4 stars and carrying the authority to protect America itself. The woman who thought she could terrorize anyone with a clipboard and fake power discovered what real authority looks like when you cross the wrong line. Sometimes the universe has a funny way of delivering exactly the kind of justice you never saw coming. All I wanted was peace and quiet in my lake cabin office. What I got was a front row seat to the most spectacular downfall of a petty tyrant I've ever witnessed. Beverly picked the worst possible day to mess with me. But for our community, for justice, and for everyone who's ever been bullied by someone, drunk on fake power, it turned out to be the perfect day for karma to finally come calling.